Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we live and work on unceded Sinaitic Smoolau. So if you don't know Smoolau, that's homeland in the Sinaitic dialects and Tsilhquen. So if you can take that word and spread it around with you, you'll be doing a little bit of the language resurgence work here in the territory. So if you do that, we'll be extra happy with you. Just a little bit of housekeeping things. We've got a few other presentations coming up you aren't going to want to miss, so we'll hope to see all of your lovely faces back here again. We're going to have Richie Mann doing another presentation for us here. He's going to do one, I believe that's May 8th, and it's going to be on the early farms in Skeety Hills. So again, you don't want to miss that one. We're also going to have a speaker series presentation on bats. That's going to be on June 6th, so you won't want to miss that one either. But I don't want to take up any more of you guys' time. The reason we're all here tonight, of course, is for Melanie. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, we've got Melanie as an outdoor enthusiast, an artist, a geologist, a landscape horticulturist, and I guess evidently an incredibly busy person. So without further ado, we'll ask Melanie, please come on up and do your own work.
Hi everybody. It melts my heart to see the turnout tonight. Thank you for taking the time to come over and being curious and open-minded to maybe some concepts that may be new to some of you. It's been a dream for me to do this talk at the museum. I told Doreen like last year or the year before, and she was like, do it at the museum. And it took me some time to get to where I am at today, but with everything else that's going on. But yeah, so I guess I'm living my dream right now. And new faces to me, other faces that I recognize. This is very nice, and I'm so happy to be a part of our community. And so this is the topic I wanted to talk about today, rethinking the ornamental gardens. Rethinking because when I start getting into this presentation, you'll see that over time I've learned some interesting things about our gardening practices that have been done for many years, our habits, and also some other things that I've learned that I think with climate change, whether I know some people don't believe that climate change is a thing, but that's not the point. Pollinators are in decline, and we are relying on them. They rely on the plants. There's some symbiotic relationships that we need to keep in mind. And so, without further ado, sorry. Okay, so and creating pollinator pathways and resilient flora retreats in our own backyards. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm a member of the Native Bee Society of BC, and we've had a workshop to learn more about bees, and I'm really passionate about pollinators, and I always like to know what I'm talking about, and so turns out there's so many species of bees. We'll get into it in a little bit, but they have slides that I'm using that are provided to any volunteers that want to speak more about bees. And so I have on the table in the center there some brochures that if any one of you is interested can have some. There's also like a door prize on there, so that's not part of the giveaway. I also left a box at the table at the back there if you have some suggestions for other topics that, if you'll want to have me again, I would love to come back. So maybe there's other things that will come up that you'd like me to speak about. So the Native Bee Society of BC, it's formed in 2019, and they focus on education, research, collecting data. They do some community events, basically to teach everyone about native bees. And you should follow them. And so a little intro and a little bit of exposing myself here. This is me when I was 2, and I guess I was a nerd at an early age and really enjoying being outside. And I was really into frogs and bullfrogs at the time. I guess I still am because they come and hang out with me in the gardens. I also always like to do art, and I did this contest one time for a drawing contest, and it was about getting people together. And so I feel like opportunities like tonight, anytime we do community event and outreach and art, it gets people together, but it's also like when we get people together, then we're not alone and we can get more things done. So anyway, with the art, I was like, do I go into science or art in college and whatever? And then I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I should do art. I'll go do science. So my doors open. Then I wanted to be outside, so I became a geologist, and I worked in that industry for quite some time, from 2006 to 2014. And I had some amazing opportunities to go in remote areas, fly helicopters, I was also looking at plants. I was in the Alpine and I was always curious, and then part of me felt like, I don't know, I'm kind of an imposter, like, it's like my heart is too green to keep doing this profession, like I want to do something else. I don't know if I want to contribute to the extraction of minerals and finding deposits and whatnot. It gave me the opportunity to learn more about the soil science and how the earth was created and all the different geologies, but geology also, there's plants that grow on it, and so I went back to school and I became a landscape horticulturist. At first, I was working for the city of Vancouver, and you see me on here. I was at the Blue Elk Conservatory, and it was an amazing place to work at. I was also working outside in Stanley Park, and I was exposed to like a new field, like being outside, working at the park scales, and then one of my mentor, Dave Tetzlaff, was like, you should start your own business, like just on the side. I'll sell you my tools, I'm gonna retire soon, like just all you need is get one client and you're good to go. And at the city we were finishing at 3:30, so then in the summer you can work till 7 o'clock. So I was working at the city during the day and then doing a bit of site gardening gigs while also after I finished the landscape horticulture program. And then the following summer I'm like, okay, I don't want to go back to the city, even though I learned a lot and it was great. I started on my own, and then this is me in a garden in Vancouver, and there's this, well, some people call it weed, it's mullein, and I was so happy to see this, how like prolific this plant was in an urban setting. But anyway, I'm spending a lot of time on this slide because it's like basically who made me who I am today. But what I discovered doing horticulture in urban settings and the knowledge that I got from the program of landscape horticulturists of BC is and actually, before I keep going, I kind of forgot to say a disclaimer, or like this whole talk is not about shaming or making anyone feel bad about what they're doing or what they're not doing. It's more providing some resources so everyone can learn and also maybe do a little tweaks because I'm guilty of it, or I was guilty of it too, from what I've learned before. With my own experience in gardens and whatnot, like I started to realize all this knowledge I learned in my program is not taking into account the effects of climate change. It's not really taking the effects about like the pollinators and how they interact in the gardens. And so then there was a summer in Vancouver. It started out, there was smoke, and then this is Rossland as well. And then I was like, okay, so on the coast, I can work 8 or 9 months of the year. Some people work all year too. They just work in the rain in December and January, but it's pretty miserable. And then in Rossland, I was like, okay, so I have to work, or the gardening season is like 6 months. Sometimes it's 5 months. Sometimes there's a lot of snow. Sometimes like spring comes early, and then sometimes, hopefully not so bad this year, but forest fires, smoke, and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, so we need gardens, we need pollinators, but like, how can I work just 5 or 6 months of the year to make up for my whole year, because my work is seasonal, and all I can think of is all these factors that I can't control, like the weather and the climate change and whatnot. So I'm like, and I'm also seeing in the gardens too, like how they're affected by it. And so this is the current map of the drought conditions in BC. And then if we zoom in as to where we are in Rossland, well, for April, we're in moderate drought already. I'm sure that's not a surprise because we see there's not a lot of snow, and I don't know if you're dry or not, but like from what I've seen, it's pretty dry already. And so a little bit of a long slide about something I'm really passionate about. And also why we got to think about biodiversity for the topics I covered about, you know, the effects of climate change, drought, water restrictions, and all these other factors we can't control. What's behind that is biodiversity. What does that mean? So the first part is one definition that's kind of more straightforward, and I'll just read it out loud, because who doesn't like a French person reading out loud in English? The natural world around us and all the diverse organisms, such as plants, animals, insects, fungi, lichens, and microorganisms. All are interconnected in ecosystems to maintain and support life on Earth and coexist in delicate balance. Now, the other definition is more poetic, and it almost brings tears to my eyes when I read it. The fruits of billions of years of evolution, shaped by natural processes and increasingly by the influence of humans, it forms the web of life of which we are an integral part and upon which we so fully depend. It also encompasses the variety of ecosystems, such as those that occur in deserts, forests, wetlands, mountains, lakes, rivers, and agricultural landscapes. In each ecosystem, living creatures, including humans, form a community, interacting with one another and with the air, water, and soil around them. Now, some facts about biodiversity. One of the items are plants, and they support life on Earth, including ourselves. And, you know, interestingly enough, more than the plants that are in extinction is twice as high as for mammals, birds, amphibians combined. I suppose there's more plants than creatures, but it just goes to show like they're in bad shape. 2/3 of the world's biodiversity has been lost since the 1970s. That's like, I should say these stats are from 2020. So when that came out, that meant it was like 50 years ago. Like, how did we lose 2/3 of the biodiversity in 50 years? To me, that's crazy. And then this is the Xerces butterfly. That one was extinct in North America. It was the first butterfly known to be extinct in the 40s. So I really like this slide because of how artistic it is, but really it goes to show the relationship between humans and biodiversity. So we see like plants, they support nutrition, agriculture, food security, medicine, mental health. It goes on and on. Microbial biodiversity, disaster risk, water quality. All these interactions will affect our well-being. And then this slide, can anyone like see? I guess there's some smaller writings, but I'm gonna make it simplified. So basically, this side of the slide says domesticated and wild. So all of the biodiversity in here is what we use as food. So there's a portion of it that's the domesticated, and then the other part is wild. So what's wild has to be maintained with some kind of resilience, knowing that there's the effects of climate change. But both sides contribute to what food we have available. So, but what really controls our food security is the indirect biodiversity. So it just says here, biodiversity that creates the conditions for food production. So in the finer prints here are like pollinators, some nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and other microorganisms in the soil. Like these are all it's interesting, they're like the smallest creatures, but if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have much of the rest of the food that we eat. And so it's kind of good food for thought. And the other indirect biodiversity here is so different types of ecosystem, like these just state here, seagrass meadows, coral reefs, mangroves, other wetland forests, rangelands. And for me, what comes up to mind is the grasslands on Record Ridge. They really contribute to our well-being. Okay, so you recognize this map. I put it up here just to kind of see in like an aerial view where we are located and what the landscape looks like. Of course, the populated areas are in like valley bottoms, and we can see here where the proposed site is to be on Record Ridge. I'm just pointing it out because it's kind of a good overview. And then the ski hill, and we can see like the lighter colors. Some are areas of the alpine, so they're outcrops, but you can see it's kind of a Swiss cheese looking landscape. And I thought when I looked at this map myself before putting it into the presentation, is I was like, okay, so I escaped the concrete jungle of the coast, or like being in a big urban center, but looking at this aerial map, I'm like, even though we're far from like a big urban center, the landscape has quite been changed. And then, if we take a closer look here, we can see, some effects from the previous mining a century ago, and then some other open areas. And so there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. The reason though too I wanted to show this slide in a closer look is that then where we live, it's mostly roads, and it's private land, some resorts. And so I just wanted to let everyone think about how much wild spaces there are around town. And like, from what I can see, aside from the roads and whatnot, it's the private lands, which are, some of your homes. And so what is on the property, most of the properties is lawns and ornamental gardens. And so I also want everyone to think about, like, if these are the still wild places and are where we live as a urban landscape, and pollinators, wildlife, ecosystems, we all interact with them. How are we expecting pollinators and wildlife, well, aside from the bears, because we know why they're here, but like, how can we attract these pollinators? And some people tell me, like, I don't really see that many bees, I don't see that many birds. And I'm like, well, yeah, but like, how can we expect them to fly around when they don't have much that's still like native plants and nutritious food for them? So I don't want anybody to feel bad about that, but there's like some solutions, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. I swear this talk will go into more like positive, happy, go-lucky topics, but I have to like just, start on a fresh slate so we're all on the same page. So these are some articles you might see online or on the radio. It's kind of a big thing, like, oh, lawns and climate change, and how much do we want to maintain them, and I'm tired of mowing my lawn, and like, I don't want to water my garden, and there's water restrictions, and like, all my life I was taught that a lawn needs to be green and lush, and so what do we need to do to to maintain that, because otherwise my neighbors are gonna judge me, because like I got all these weeds in my lawn, and anyway, so it's like this perpetual thing that keeps going, and like no one is really at fault. It's just like what we're told to do and what's supposed to be cool to do, but it's not cool anymore. And it's not even about it being cool. It's more like when we think about it, like who wants to spend time mowing their lawn when they could have part of it into a garden, and then instead of like listening to a loud gas-powered blower, they could just sit down and look at all the cool butterflies and bees that come visit their garden instead. This, like, I love this picture so much. It might be from a pot inside of my really good friend and soul sister's house. Thanks, Doreen, for being who you are. It says, "I am Mr. Forest, look after me." And so more articles about, on the David Suzuki Foundation, like some alternatives for lawns. And then, let's just think about, is my property or this lawn or gardens, do they support any life? Do I see pollinators? Well, these are some good questions that we can think about. And so, and also another thing I wanted to say earlier is like, this talk is not about, trash talking non-native plants or non-native trees, because some of these plants have good purposes as well, and at the end of the day, any plant is good for sequestering carbon. But some have more ecological value, and when we start looking at our outdoor properties as a whole, it's more thinking about, okay, well, are there certain things I can do to improve to have more pollinators come into my property, but also to kind of help with the bigger picture that we're trying to do. And so if everything is non-native, then chances are the poor pollinators won't have anything to eat, because plants in traditional nurseries, like, they're all really beautiful to the eye, but it turns out like a lot of the hybridization that happened over years makes like a certain flower not even have any pollen anymore. And, or the colors of the petals of the flower, like none of the pollinators can recognize, because they only see like red, yellow, and certain shades of green. So it's like, the more I learn about that, I don't know about you, but I'm just like, oh, I had no idea, like, but it makes sense. Okay, next slide. So this wonderful person here, Dr. Doug Tallamy, I just think like, I listen to his talks and everything that he does, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, like, blows my mind. So he started this project like years ago in the United States called Homegrown National Park. So the idea is to like turning our urban landscapes into wild places, or restoring our land for creating pollinator habitats. So he calls them national parks. And he says that in the US, if everyone or all the lawns were reduced in half, it would solve climate change. So this is like a documentary that he has that I recommend everyone watching. And this is an interesting statement here. He says, in the past, we have asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water. And they still can be pretty. And it can be messy too. Okay, so another big slide, why native plants are important. Okay, so there's different reasons. They are a food source for humans and animals, insects. An interesting thing here that I have is provide food source for birds, and they act as host plants for larvae, and at the same time, these plants are food for larvae themselves. So when I say larvae, I mean like caterpillars or butterflies and moths. So certain like leafage, like I'm sure you've seen some caterpillars on your kale or other cruciferous plants that you grow in your food garden, and there's caterpillars on it. It's because when a butterfly or a moth is in its caterpillar phase, it needs to eat, and their food is leaves. And if all they have to eat for their host plants in your garden is kale or spinach or whatever, then that's what they're going to go for. But then if there's some native plants that will support them while they're in caterpillar phase, then maybe they won't eat your kale. And so these plants also provide habitat, they maintain ecological health, they help sequester carbon, manage soil erosion, they require less maintenance, and also they manage water better, and they also they're good at finding their own water because they've been adapted to our ecoregions, and typically their roots will go very deep. And so I just want you to imagine being in the Alpine, or you go for a walk in the mountains, or going for a hike in the mountains, again on Record Ridge, because it's kind of my favorite place around here. There's such a variety of flowering plants, and everything is thriving. There's not really any water, and it's like, well, how can all these plants thrive up there? Well, it's because they have really deep roots, and they are used to these conditions, whereas Ceylon, their roots are really shallow, and it creates thatch over time, and then it's hard for the water to penetrate the soil. That's why you have to call some, grass maintenance company to come and aerate the lawn, because the water can't get in, and then the fertilizers and the chemicals and whatnot. Anyway, I digress, but basically they have all these great things, and I wanted to show you something about the host plant topic. So I was hiking on Deer Park Mountain one summer ago or two, and I saw this particular creature, and I was like, oh, I don't know, but it was smiling, or he's up to something, I don't know, but you can see there's cutouts in the leaves, and anyone can guess what plant that is? I don't know if you can just see the leaves right now. Yes.
What was that? Fireweed?
It's fireweed.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, well, what do you think, knowing so this particular caterpillar likes to eat leaves of fireweed, and I already love fireweed for many reasons, and but it's cool to see, what one can read in a book and go out in the wild and witness it, and also be more familiar with, okay, if my plant in my garden has some cutout sections of it, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Maybe you're just contributing to the health of a cool butterfly or a moth. And so I looked it up. I was like, wow, how do I find this? So I just put in the search mode, caterpillar or horn caterpillar. And then this is what I found. Right? Yeah, and I've seen pictures of occurrences around Rossland, but it's just nature is just so incredible and beautiful. So think twice about the caterpillars. And so there's some easy solutions, yay, and at all kinds of length. No one needs to run out of here right now and just get rid of their lawn. That's not the point of this talk.
We'd like to.
Well, I mean, ultimately, but really, it all starts with a seed, or sowing some some seeds of a native plant in a pot, or in the fall, it's a good time to go wild seed collecting. And the native seeds, they like to overwinter, and so sowing them in the fall is also the best time. And so it could just be, you know, I live in a condo and my backyard is a balcony. Well, that's great. You can put native plants in your planters, and I can tell you which one looked so beautiful that you won't even know it's a wild plant, and your neighbors are not going to judge you. It's not going to look messy. So just a bit of an overview of what's else to come, and it's not all doom and gloom. So basically, I'm gonna point out what are different pollinators, and then we'll do a deep dive, nerding out on bees. There's all kinds of things to know about them, but I'll explain why it's important to know, and why I want to focus on bees as the pollinators, and then some ecological practices, some that I incorporate in my practices, and how we can fill the gaps to create pollinator pathways, resources, all the good stuff. So pollinators, well, why they're important, I think you're starting to get it, and you probably know already. They support life on Earth, they support us, they are species that are adapted to the plants that are local to here. And so they're used to these plants because they've evolved with them over time. And they're also really efficient, the native pollinators, especially the native bees, compared to honeybees. They have a different way of working that helps pollinate more plants over time. And then the bees have evolved to carry pollen with them too as they go from flower to flower, so it helps with the pollen dispersal. The pollinator food crops, thanks for them. And also they have a symbiotic relationship with plants. So the bee needs food and it goes to a plant, a flower, but also the flower needs help to reproduce. They're kind of like the little add-on to get them to reproduce. And then once the plant reproduces, that's when it produces a fruit or a nut or a seed. And so then it turns to food, and the cycle goes on. Okay, so different types of pollinators. The bees, of course. Wasps are pollinators. I know they're not the friendliest, but think of it as like the mean person. But they have good intentions and a good heart too. We're kind of like the Grinch. And flies are pollinators too. Butterflies, moths, beetles, birds. I hear ants are pollinators as well. And so now, let's get a deep dive into following Alice in Wonderland into this rabbit hole. So think a pollinator for 1 out of every 3 bites we take or eat is a result of a pollinator. I really like this picture because this bee really had a good time. Yeah, it's a sweat bee, and then there's an image here of a flower and its anatomy with the male parts of a flower that are the anthers, and then the middle part here is the feminine part called the stigma. And so the anthers needs to go in there, and how they go in there is with a Q-tip, but we don't have time for that, especially not farmers. So bees and other pollinators do that. And also, what else I wanted to say about this slide is that I've mentioned it a little bit earlier, is like flowers have particular cues on them that will attract specific pollinators. Sometimes it's the color of the petals or how the stamens are showing or the different textures. They recognize that, and the shape of the flowers too. And I took this botany course, I was like, oh, so like moths and butterflies have a really pointy long tongue, so like butterfly attracting flowers will have like a longer kind of a tube. And so everything is connected and working together is just so amazing to me. So in British Columbia, and where we are in southern BC, we have about 400 species of bees, or 450 species, but the southern interior has the most. And also in Canada, or in BC, there's 7 species of bees, and we have 6 out of the 7 ones. Also, what's important to note is that, well, I just want to say 20,000 species of bees worldwide. And so we have a lot in Canada and in the US. Okay, I'm not going to read this slide, but it's basically says what's a bee. Well, a bee is an insect, and it's also called an animal now. Insects are animals. But the bees have evolved in, I guess I might as well just switch to the next slide because I wanted something a little bit more straightforward, but basically they appeared 130 million years ago, and they're in symbiotic relationship with flowering plants, and it so happens that these flowering plants came at the same time in the insect evolution. This is a really interesting video on YouTube from the Xerces Society. It's just a slide I put in there to kind of put in a graphic what the other slide was talking about, but all there is to note is this is the geological time scale here, and 130 would be here, and this time where insects evolve into being bees is at the same time as the angiosperms, which are the plants that are in symbiotic relationship with bees. So bee anatomy here, just what I want to point out is that as an insect, they evolved to have some hair, either on their legs or under their belly or on their back legs. Basically, these hairs or these pollen baskets is where the pollen gets attached to them and how they can transport it and pollinate it. So it's I guess the pollinator that evolved over time to do that. The other pollinators typically go to flowers for eating the nectar, but they don't really take anything with them. They just go to the flowers to eat. But bees, they take the pollen and they also eat the pollen. The other insects don't necessarily eat the pollen. This is the anatomy of a bumblebee. Things you see on Instagram, but it's funny. Okay, so this slide, I wanted to bring it up because it can be tricky to identify what insects are bees or like, because bees and wasps and flies, they can sometimes look very similar. And so I'm just letting you, the next slide will show what is which, but just to, you know, if you kind of can guess in your mind what's a bee, what's a fly, what's a wasp. And then here I just basically, bees and all these other insects have very similar characteristics, but what's different about bees is they have those hairs that can carry the pollen. So are you ready for the answers? Okay, so this is a bee, this is a hoverfly, this is a bee, this is a fly that makes you want to think it's a bee. Like, how cool is that? Honestly, like I wouldn't know, but the bottom line is like, you know, if you don't know, then just let it be. And so yellow jacket, this is a digger bee, another bee, and this is another insect. This one's a little bit easier because there's some that are obvious. fly here, this moth, and then, what's the other one? Yeah, the grasshopper. Oh, maybe there's four actually. Or there's a cricket, and there's an ant. This is an ant, but unless you, well, I guess it doesn't have wings, but you know, they all look so similar, and they should all be appreciated. Okay, so bees. More about bees. These are the different species or the different families that we have in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so we have 6 out of 7, and we're just gonna go dive in a little bit more. I'm not a bee expert by any means. You probably know this already, but these are some wonderful slides that the Native Bee Society has provided to volunteers like me so that we can all kind of learn together and be a bit more aware.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the families. You'll see more about this particular species here, the leafcutter bee. It's got some kind of a beak, and then woolcarder bee. Oh yeah, you can see it here. So this contraption, I wanted to know if this is connected to the eyes, but it's basically this contraption that can chop chunks of leaves. And it's probably my favorite bee until I get onto something else that's cooler. Now these other species, there's the honeybee, bumblebees, carpenter bees. The honeybee is the one that everyone knows more about. I'll tell you some interesting facts about the honeybees. Well, it's not about where all the bees should be included, but the honeybee is not native to Canada. All the other species are. And then these are other types of bees in a different species, the sweat bee, mining bee, polyester bee. Some are brown nesting. I'll tell you more about what that means. Solitary, social. And then this one is quite interesting. It's a bee that collects floral oils. So they don't just eat pollen and nectar. And then there's these interesting ones. Those bees, they don't have the hairs on them, but they're still bees and they steal pollen from other bees. So that's all I was going to say about that, but I just wanted to point it out because I didn't know that was a thing. But people steal in all kinds of shapes and forms. And so we've covered a little bit about that. Bees eat nectar, pollen, floral oils. And then this slide has a lot, but really what it's pointing out the most is there's some generalist bees and specialist bees. The generalist bees, they're like, they eat everything, or they pollinate more than one type of plants. And whether they're native plants or non-native plants that have pollen and other characteristics. And then there's specialist bees. And the specialist bees, they just eat from one plant in particular. And so there's a list of specialist bees and the specific plants that they require. So if we let that sink in, a little bit about the specialist bees is that all these specific plants, like say this one bee only eats out of this showy daisy, and there's not a lot of showy daisies around, what are they supposed to do? And goldenrod typically has a lot of different bees that will go after them, and they're really good host plants as well. And they're good for creating habitat because certain insects will go on the goldenrod, and there are insects that will provide food for birds, and so on. So another extensive list, and this can be downloaded on the Native Bee Society of BC, and it's all native plants for the area, or some of them anyways that are already categorized. There's more also, and But anyway, so why do I want to take you further down this rabbit hole? Because pollinators are related to plants, and the way they tailor to plants, or the way we tailor to plants in our own backyards, is going to affect how it affects the pollinators. And also, how ecologically minded your garden space and your garden practices are will directly impact the pollinators as well. Again, lots of people tell me they don't see a lot of bees anymore, but at this length in the talk, like, is that surprising to you? Here, it's just kind of shows like an overview of all the different species of bees. I realize that the numbers don't add up, but that's just pretend this is 80%. But basically the point is that most of the bee species around the world are solitary. And a fine percent are social or semi-social. And then the social ones, the honeybees, they only account for about 1% of the whole bee species. And so I wanted to mention that because, you know, I appreciate honeybees, but it's how did this species of bees make it to be the poster child, or what comes into our minds about what bees are, like, but only 1% of them live in a beehive and make honey. Most of the bees, they live by themselves in holes that they make into the ground. And I'll get more into like the types of nests that bees have and how they make their nest and why it's important to know those things. So the solitary bees, their life cycle, there's different kinds, but essentially what is to take away here is that in the spring, bees will emerge and then they mate and they find some kind of either it's like in the ground or in a hollow stem of a plant or in a hole in like a branch or a dead branch or a tree, and then they lay their eggs in there with a bit of food, and then eventually they go through hibernation and then emerge again. That's kind of a simplified version. And like say the bumblebee, that's really interesting too. In the spring, the bumblebees you see are the queens. The other bees, the babies, I guess, they haven't emerged yet because she'll go out and kind of, they have different types of nests that, those drawings are really acknowledging how these bumblebee nests look like. And so, but what's good to note about this diagram is that bumblebees typically hibernate in leaf litter and also in the ground as well. And so again, it's, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Some other diagrams of ground nesting bees and, you know, traditional gardening practices would say like, we have to plant plants very far apart, and then we want to put a mulch, but like a heavy like bark mulch, and now we know like bark mulch is not fire smart, but what I want to say is like it's important to leave spaces in your garden that have a bit of sand, that are not covered and everything, so that ground nesting bees can find a spot to hibernate or create their nest. Stem and cavity nesters, those are also solitary bees, and I'm just gonna describe out loud what this, it's probably in fine print over there, but essentially, let's start in the spring. And so it's about basically what to do with your plants, because there's not really any such thing about spring cleanup and fall cleanup. Like we can still use those terms, but the association that comes to mind with spring cleanup and fall cleanup is like everything needs to look clean, everything needs to be cut down to the ground, everything needs to be bare. We gotta take our leaf stuff and put it on the road so then the city can like clean it up. And that made sense maybe at some point, but if we're trying to like not have Rossland so dry, and we don't want to have to rely on watering our garden as much because we don't have that much water. For one thing, maybe it's not going to rain that much this summer or in general, like, and wouldn't that be great to like not have to spend a lot of money to install an irrigation system or something like that? Like, what if everything could just be? And so where I'm getting at with this is, so let's get back to the spring cleanup or the fall cleanup, the stems. What's important to know is that so the cavity or stem nesting bees, they go find a spot to lay their eggs in the spring in a hollow stem. And so in the fall, we want to leave the stems up of our plants and be okay with this look and looking at the seed heads, and some of these flowers will have like seeds for birds that will tie them over for the winter, and you know, maybe they'll flop or whatever, but it's fine, you know. And so by leaving them up, then they will start decaying on their own, and then comes the spring, we can like deadhead some of the stems, or at least leaving them to like 12 inches or something like that. And that should be enough if a bee decides to make it their home for their babies. And by cutting some of those plants to kind of tidying up in the spring, that's when the bees emerge from hibernation and come and lay their eggs. And then in the summer, the other plants or the other shoots of that plant will come up and hide those older stems, so you won't even see them anymore anyway. And then again, like comes the fall, you can just leave everything as is, do a little bit of tidying. Maybe there's some plants though that you don't want to go to seed, and that's fine. So you can like, you know, deadhead the plants, and then again, like this cycle goes into the spring, and then eventually the older stems will just fall off, and then they create mulch, and it's just wonderful. Now, that's what the leaf cutter bee does. So if you see marks in a leaf, that's what they do, but I call them the burrito bees. So they take chunks out of leaves, and then they wrap it up in a little burrito, put an egg of their baby in some food, and then they jam it into a tube, essentially, in scientific terms. Gardening for pollinators. It's a wonderful drawing here. I didn't do it. This lady did it. And but what's the takeaway is all the things that your garden can be for a pollinator. So it can be showy, have plants growing at different times of the years that will provide flowers from early spring to late fall. It's important to think about our garden and see, oh, is there gaps in the flowering time that I could like find the perfect native plant to cover that gap. And also, yeah, native plants, bountiful. To not leave a lot of space between the plants is important too, because like, I'll show some examples, but basically, if plants are so far apart, then they're more exposed to, like, say their soil is around them, the soil will dry up, and then they rely on water more. So one way to, you know, because I know plants too in pots are expensive, so we can sow seeds or fill the gaps with like with leaves for mulch, and then with a ground cover, so eventually everything is covered up, and still with having also we can leave little rock piles in certain sections, like unless you don't like snakes and alligator lizards or blue skin lizards, but the snakes will take care of these pests that come and rip up your garden, like voles or moles or whatever. So it's kind of a permaculture technique. And then I have this here. I know it's kind of tricky sometimes for thinking about fire smart versus ecologically minded practices, but I think there's room for both. There just needs to be some collaboration in between. So this was just a nurturing tree, and it was cut like halfway, so it can still be up even though it's dead, because woodpeckers like to, or other birds like to nest in some dead trees, and so maybe we can like keep them up for some of the other pollinators. Okay, so just quickly here, this was a garden that I worked on, and I was very grateful to have this opportunity, because providing a garden on this space that was very highly of a construction zone, like it looks quite clean, but there was all kinds of different shaped rocks, and it was really compacted. So if we left it like that, it would have been so hot, and it's south facing, so it's already a really hot spot, but having some greenery and plants will help with the ambient temperature and keeping the moisture in the ground, and preventing more soil erosion, and also helping for the water to percolate in the soil. There's no native plants yet per se, but I got the go ahead that I can add some this year, so I'm really excited about that. And then these gardens here, I just wanted to show the spacing between the plants and the rocks, and how this was like previous learning of like everything needs to look clean, like we got to take everything out, and then make sure the sprinkler system is there, and everything is all tidy and everything. And then here the rocks get so hot, and then the plants don't have much shade, and they're all so far apart, so the soil dries up all the time. So then this garden relies on water all the time, and it's constantly fighting the heat. And then those ones too, like those poor plants, they don't know what to do with themselves. And same with here. And then this is just, again, it's not shaming or anything like that. And I'm like, when I see that, you probably saw me with bags and like bagging up the leaves, because I know where places can benefit from the leaves. And some properties have a lot of maple trees and a lot of other deciduous trees that create a lot of leaves. So if you don't know what to do with your leaves, just call me, because I know exactly where they're going to go. it's not that for a lawn, I don't know if it's worth it. And then also, it's important to have different types of flowers, a good diversity, different colors, different shapes. Try to not propagate invasive species, leave the leaves. It's good to have big clumps of plants. Think about the bees that nest in the ground. You can also make some nice signs to like show that you have a native garden or something like that, and that's always nice to see. And these are just some flowers I wanted to show that come up in the spring or shortly after, and they're really critical because in the spring when pollinators come out, they don't have much food. They have dandelions or these native plants. Spring beauty, these violets, the glacier lilies, kinnikinnick, and then Mary. Yes, that's right. These are wonderful plants. I think if we can find seeds of them and eventually have them in our lawns, that would be a good alternative. And then arnica and shrubby penstemon, that's on top of Old Glory, but it's in gardens in Rossland because I have some plants that I put in and those provide good food. And then other plants for other times of the year that are beautiful. They can be a little bit messy or not, but I just wanted to, there's so many plants, there are more than like 100 different species, but showing milkweeds for monarchs. And then this is the annual that sells seeds that you can have in your basket and they look like little antlers. It's called Pink Fairy and it flowers all summer. It's just amazing. This is a good alternative for allium. It's the native one. Good ground cover, those wild strawberries, Pearly Everlasting, which is a bee magnet, asters, Grand Palomia, and so on.
What was the bottom right one called again?
The bottom right, oh, Pink Fairies.
Pink Fairies.
Clarkia Colchella. And then the precious leaves, these are just to show like sometimes little caterpillars are in there, there's mushrooms. This is some type of a soon-to-be butterfly under the leaves, putting the leaves under some in gardens. They're amazing and getting used to their look because when the plants come up, you don't really see them anymore, so it should be fine. Other tips for gardening for bees or other pollinators, leave the leaves, think of the hollow stems, having little branches and whatnot. So that all helps with soil erosion, keeping the moisture in the ground. And then one thing too for seeds and seed heads and birds, like what you can do for birds, like in the spring we don't want to have our seeds out because of the bear, but instead of these little baskets that you normally put suet in it, you could put some material to help birds do their nest. I have some examples on the table over there. All little things like that make such a big difference. Also putting some bird baths, but also bowls of water with some rocks so that the bees can have a drink. But putting rocks in the plate is important because if the water's too deep, the bees will drown, so they have to have something that they can climb on. So many things, so little time. A lot of info is on the Xerces Society website if you want to go find some information. Hot topic these days, especially in town. But if you, not to like think about that, but I was thinking there's other types of Airbnbs you can create. And for retreats, and you don't require a permit for it. And no bylaws. And so the smiley faces are some gardens I've had the great chance to work on. And it's either some native plants were added, or a part of a lawn was turned into a garden, or an ornamental garden was optimized. And this doesn't take into account like the native plants that are already growing on their own in town, but I would love to do a project to like map the whole area and basically the idea with pollinator pathways is like filling the gaps so then bees can go from one spot to the next and they don't have to travel very far. And then a dream of mine too is connecting Rossland with the restored areas out in Castlegar around Syringa that other amazing groups are working on to get monarch butterflies to come back. And so could we like, you know, plant showy milkweed in some locations in town and from here to Castlegar and then have this great pathway. That's one example.
Are there butterfly under monarchs in Rossland?
Not that I know of.
There was.
There was.
There was.
So they were native.
They were native.
Yeah, they're native to all of Canada.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
there was.
So they'll come back.
The last one was actually in 1997.
Okay, takeaways. Well, take it easy. It's okay. Nothing happens overnight. You know, the fact that you came here tonight is huge, and it really touches my heart. But there's power in numbers, and you know, you could just have a pot on your doorstep with some native seeds in it, and that's helping. It's best to sow native plant seeds in the fall, and think of flowering gaps. What else did I might have missed? Leave the leaves. Rethink about what spring and fall cleanup looks like. And then let's keep sharing knowledge, communicating, collaborating, creating partnerships. Well, you know this song and the Three Little Birds, so I'll leave you with that. But basically, one love, one seed. I think that's how the song goes. One plant, one garden, one lawn. Let's live together and feel all right. Some bee resources. Netflix alternative. Yeah, it's that documentary I was talking about. What's the rush? Let your garden grow wild. Native plants that will be planted. They have amazing podcasts. We need to talk about honeybees. And there's some books from Dr. Doug Tellamy that are amazing as well. And then some seed and plant resources. It's kind of tricky to find, but we have a nursery here. There will be a new nursery somewhere in Trail. Stay tuned for that. The Trail Public Library too carries some seeds. They haven't put them out yet, but they will soon. And then sagebrush, I have some seeds and plants, and these other Elk Root Conservation in the Slocan area, they provided the seeds for the Trail Public Library, and maybe we can talk with them. I have a meeting with them next week and see if we can bring some seeds, or seed library here. And CKIS also have great resources. Acknowledgements, of course, the museum, Skylar and Fiona have been amazing to put this together, and their support crew. Our friends at Pinseeds and the Native Bee Society, Kootenai Native Plant. These are my teachers that did my program at the UBC Botanical Garden, Dave Tetzlaff, Kaylee at Moon Gravity, all my friends that helped me in the gardens, Michelle Desjardins, my Rossland mom, and these wonderful people, all my clients, Stephen, my family, my friends.
So I think you're opening up to questions, so before I make anybody do another round of applause, do you have any questions here?
Oh, yeah.
Are you the same Melanie that works with the Save the Rock, Save Record Grid?
I am.
Well, I wanted to thank you for all the work you've done. You sent our person today. And your references to being up there and basically I wanted to thank you because I know that you work diligently in the background. And I think we need to say, just keep on the fight with that because Record Ridge is just too much of a jewel to lose. So not only for the pollinators, but it would be an absolute shame to lose that. But thank you for tonight.
Here, here. Thank you.
I
Do
think
you want to monitor? I don't want to pick.
Absolutely, all right. As long as
Everyone
I'm
can
trying to
go.
show over here.
So just a question, like, and I don't know whether this is the right or wrong thing to do. So, like, for example, you know, hiking around and seeing the glacier lilies right now, they're just like, they're all over the place and they're so beautiful. And if you want to grow them in your backyard, is it, you know, like, to take a few of them from the mountain and bring them into your yard to, you know, just try and start getting them propagated? Is that the wrong practice to do or a bad thing to do?
Yeah.
Like, you know, because hopefully they'll that you could propagate more, right?
Right, so the thing with that is like, the native plants in general don't like to be transplanted, and it's best to leave them where they are, knowing that there's a lot of glacier lilies, but they will grow from seed, and I have some seed.
Oh,
The seed takes 3 years to germinate. So it's quite, but we see a lot because eventually they multiply from self-seeding or by their bulbs, but their bulbs are quite deep, and then it's more like destructive to the ecosystem, and I don't think it's sustainable or the right approach, unfortunately. And also some plants that might have more success to be divided or transplanted, they end up like not making it from the transplant. So it's better to have starters and growing them from seeds. And also then we know that we can't take the risk of them not working, and then if everyone was to do that too, then it would be like, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, all questions are good.
All right, so in the back there, I
Yeah.
saw that had to come first.
Yeah.
If I didn't believe it.
You know, I always would leave a good amount of leaves. This year I cleaned up, not to the point of nothing, because of the fire problem. Now we've got this problem. They're saying, get rid of combustibles around your house. Here's the problem. How much do we have to get rid of? I know pine needles, I'm scraping those up, and conifers, I got lots of conifers, but I also have lots of maples. And I used to leave the maple leaves. Now I've been gathering them up, cleaning up, not because my garden needs to be clean, but because of the fear of fires.
Right, that's
How are we
a really
gonna
good
handle
question. And that brings up this topic in a way that, like, I can address some of my own concerns with some fire smart practices. Like, there's a bit of contradiction, but that's just the reality of having different organizations doing some work without necessarily collaborating with each other, and the government is very much like that as well. Or in the medical system sometime, or just, it's like everyone has these great plans and these great ideas, but sometimes it's not really put into context with other departments or whatever that also deal with similar topics. So for for your question, I just want to say that we got to think about like a garden that's left out bare because there's nothing to help it retain the water. Then it's going to dry up, and then we don't have a way to preserve our water. And when it rains, the soil is so hydrophobic, so the water will just percolate away, ends up in our collection system, which is like a ditch on the side of the road, and all this water is going away, and then it has to be treated, and then there's a cost attached to that. So it's like, how do we keep water in the ground so we don't get so dry? And then if we're not so dry, then perhaps the soil's not going to be dry enough to burn. So we need to keep some leaves anyway. And if there's other plants to support and create some shade, then it doesn't get as wet, or sorry, as dry. And then there's no issue there. So I hope that makes sense. There has to be a balance.
Red cap in the back.
Just to comment about that one too, I had a fire smart assessment done, which you can do if you live near the edge of town. And they kind of said like 2 meters from the house, I think it was, to clear anything dry back, but that anything deciduous and stuff farther away you could leave. So they weren't even really like anti-leaf. I have a lot of leaves and they didn't raise them as an issue, except for like right beside the house. But my question was, I noticed that with our snow loads, a lot of the stems just are flat by the spring. And I wondered if the pollinators will still use them for nesting if they're lying down?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and like when I do cut back some of the stems, I leave them at the base, and as long as they're a good length, those are the ones that are hollow anyway, because stems that are not hollow, I'll just cut them up smaller and it turns into mulch. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what their criterias are, whether it's good or not, but it doesn't need to be on a plant. Yeah, and a good indicator if there is a hollow stem in your garden, and like it would be patched up at an end with some mud and whatnot if there was bees hibernating in the stem.
Does the hollow stem to have bees lay their eggs in it, does it have to be vertical or can it be lying on the ground?
As far as I understand it, it doesn't matter. But if it's still standing, I would think that it's just easier to see and get access to, depending on if there's other plants in the garden or not. So maybe they won't find the stems if they're lying on the ground. But it's essentially just kind of cutting them so they're opened up at the right time, and then just kind of like letting them be.
We have a question in the back.
If you do keep a portion of lawn, what is your opinion on a clover or alternative ground cover?
Yeah, so the best thing, because I understand too, like lawns have some purposes too, like you know, for the kids to play in the backyard, or big kids to play in the backyard, or play bocce, or you know, there's a use for them. It's not about getting rid of all of them, but lawns are typically a monoculture, or they're just different types of grass blades. So having a mixture of not just clover, like it's good to have a mix so that the ground is diverse. So say like if the lawn is just grass, then if it all kind of dies back, it all dies back because it's just one, it's a monoculture. So it's good to have a mix of like, you can have clover, but like yarrow is really good, and it's like very feathery and soft, and it likes to be mowed. So I would like mix clover and yarrow, and then you can have like those little blue scillas, or I forget the common name, but the little blue bulbs that are all over town, and those are they're not a native plants, but they're really beneficial for early food for bees. So like those are okay to put into the lawn as well. And then there's other mix that are sold, and I would just, some of those wild mix for lawns and whatnot, they have certain plants that are, some are invasive, so it's kind of tricky. So anyway, if anyone has ever had questions, like reach out and I'll answer your questions.
Any question over there?
Is there somewhere where the resources that you gave us are accessible? Somebody was taking pictures of the screen. I wish I would have been fast enough. But is there? Because
yeah.
Such.
And what else? There was, oh yeah. If no one had questions, I had some ideas. And oh yeah, these are some references, but I'll go back to the yeah.
One more.
Here.
There was other ones.
There was another one?
Before that.
There was quite a few. Oh,
One more. There we go.
There.
oh yeah. Thanks.
big cloud of greenish looking insects that we get. We have a rock wall that's full of sweet peas. And every year, it's absolutely swarming with now no bees, because I thought, well, they can't be bees because they're nesting in the ground, in the sand between the rocks. I'm also kind of freaked out because literally the entire 20-foot rock wall is riddled with holes. How deep are they going? Will they destabilize the soil or?
Oh, no, it's not, they're solitary typically, so it would just, and some of them are like really small.
They're tiny, yeah.
Yeah, so it won't affect the integrity of the structure, really.
Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's just so many, but I didn't think it would be
You
easy.
have habitat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, is there actually a source for a wildflower mix that's safe, that's actually native flowers, that you can buy somewhere, or?
Yes, so the closest, because in the past, we could get seed mix from Seed Ecologies, and they're based in Nelson. And I still have some packets of seeds from them. One is in the draw, or the raffle, sorry. So now the closest area we could get some is at the gift shop of the Trail Library.
Okay.
Because elk root conservation, they're in Slocan, they have a big property and they have like native gardens that they collect their native seeds from, and then they make packets. And so I'm hoping to collaborate with them as well, but maybe we can have some of their packets here at the museum, at the library. So I don't know if they have a mix itself or pre-made, but like you can get different, because it depends on where you want to sow the seeds to.
Yeah.
But they have, like, I've asked the list and there's like 10 different native plant species of seeds that they will carry.
Great.
Will you change the slide, please?
And I won't share the slides, but anyone is welcome to re-watch from the recording. That's going to be
Already up on YouTube, so if you go to our YouTube channel, it'll be like the most recent live post. It's nice and easy to be able to get to. All right, well, I'd like to do one more round of applause. That was an amazing presentation. I don't think you're going to know the numbers. If you do, that's like impressive.
okay. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. No, I'm joking. Sorry. 3, 4, 5, 7, 1, 5, 5.
I think you can connect with Mel here after if you want to talk about picking up that basket at the end. But otherwise, thank you all so much for coming out here tonight. Please stop by our snack table and grab a few snacks on your way out. It helps us with having to clean up. Thank you so much for coming out. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you.